This person loves sneaking into other people's beds and even sneaked into the beds of 2 women, and both women cooperated with him by letting him into their beds. They weren't in their private space, but in a communal camp. When they were getting intimate, the man was suddenly stabbed to death, and almost no one survived in the camp. Everyone was killed by Benjamin. This Benjamin had a background. He had participated in the Vietnam War. On the battlefield, he killed countless people, and after the war ended, he realized he enjoyed killing and was very good at it. He also had a habit of collecting trophies from his enemies as keepsakes. He had the habit of collecting ears from the dead. He even made himself a necklace, a real necklace made of human ears. Before the product could hit the market, he was sent to an insane asylum, and Benjamin had to have his own room in the asylum. When the staff brought him food, he pretended to hang himself. Survivors from the battlefield are just different. He was able to kill a staff member even while pretending to hang himself. He left his room, released all the other inmates, creating chaos, and then escaped. The head of the asylum entered his room and observed carefully, realizing that Benjamin had seen a newspaper about the camp reopening, which made him restless and eager to leave. The head rushed to the camp overnight, hoping the owner wouldn't take the risk of running the business there. The owner was a woman, and she was determined to open on time no matter what. This Margaret also had a story. She was the only survivor of Benjamin's massacre years ago. She pretended to be dead to survive, but she later made a strange move. Years later, she bought the camp and turned it into a tourist attraction. No one knows if she was forgiving or plotting revenge, but no one knew what she was really thinking. However, the head of the asylum suffered as he was killed by Benjamin on the way. They say gyms are full of energy, and Brooke made some trendy friends there. After finishing her workout, she went home. Her house wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy. Every time she got home, she would pick up a ring and look at it, a ring with a story she could never forget. After looking at the ring, she fell asleep peacefully, only to be woken up by Richard stabbing her neck, asking where the jewelry was. Richard saw that the only valuable piece was that ring and felt a bit guilty about his high-risk profession, so he angrily decided to make Brooke bleed a little. But after a few moves, Brooke beat him up. Someone outside heard the noise and kept knocking on the door, checking if there was a thief. Richard threw out a threat, saying he would come back for her. Hearing those words, anyone would have trouble sleeping after that. Brooke decided to go on a camping trip with her friends to clear her mind, but her friends liked doing things others wouldn't dare to do, and going places others wouldn't dare to go. On the way, they stopped at a gas station, and the attendant advised them to turn back when he heard they were heading to Camp Redwood. Camp Redwood wasn't a place for ordinary people, but they thought they were anything but ordinary. Adventure was the only way to get their adrenaline pumping. They kept going, but it wasn't long before something unexpected happened. Their car hit someone, and the person looked like they were on the verge of death. They had no choice but to take the person with them to Camp Redwood. When the person woke up and realized they were at Camp Redwood, he was scared out of his wits. He had worked so hard to leave this place, only to wake up and find himself back there. There was a reason everyone feared Camp Redwood. The gas station attendant wasn't even in Camp Redwood, but just being near it was enough to seal his fate. Do you know what Mandarin ducks playing in the water is? It comes from a novel, but this woman wanted to experience it herself. The man saw through her little scheme and cooperated. Jumping into the water, the man sank under the water, and the woman was having the time of her life. Suddenly, a car with its high beams on seemed to just sit there, watching the scene. Nervous, she accidentally squeezed the man so hard he almost couldn't breathe. They panicked and quickly left the pond. Trips like this are either a lot of fun or extremely dull. It started raining, so they returned to the house and could only smack the TV, trying to watch the school sports meet. Two men had different opinions about the athletes, and one threw a can, which Ray blocked with his hand, cutting it. Ray was furious. Watching TV shouldn't result in injuries. The worst part was that the first aid kit was in another room, so Ray had to go find it on his own. Brooke, being kind-hearted, went with him. Brooke helped Ray bandage his wound, and Ray was so touched he thought love was in the air. Brooke wanted to go to the medical room to find some disinfectant for Ray, but when she turned around, she saw someone hanging behind the door, and outside the window, there was a man in black. Brooke's legs shook, and she ran for her life. She ran and fell multiple times, but finally made it back to the house, where there were more people. They grabbed flashlights and went outside, but didn't find anything. They went to the medical room together. They entered cautiously, but it wasn't like Brooke had said. There was no one hanging behind the door, not even a trace. People began to doubt Brooke, thinking she was hallucinating. When everyone tells you that you're wrong, you start to believe there's some truth to what they're saying. But first, they tried to calm her down. indirectly suggesting she might be mentally ill. When they saw the owner wearing a black raincoat, they relaxed, thinking Brooke had scared herself. Everyone thought Brooke was sick and paranoid. When everyone says you're sick, even if you're not, you might start to feel like you are. But she did have some emotional baggage. On the day of her wedding, as her father was about to give her away to the man who was about to become her husband, friends and family all gathered, and Brooke wore a happy smile. But the man couldn't be cheerful, because he had learned a secret. Brooke had spent the night with his best friend the night before. Spending the night was bad enough, but he also saw it happen. He had been stewing all night. One was the love of his life, and the other his closest friend. The man had seen them in the room at night, and only in the morning did they come out. His friend said they didn't do anything. Brooke hurriedly explained that her friend had only slept on the couch and nothing really happened. When trust is lost, sometimes explanations only make things more complicated. Seeing that no explanation would clear her name, Brooke could only say, "I love you," but when love loses trust, "I love you" can easily become "I hate you." The man pulled out a gun and shot his best friend, the man he had known all his life. He went on a killing spree, but it was clear that he loved Brooke. He held her in his arms, heartbroken, and couldn't bring himself to hurt her. He turned the gun on himself, though Brooke was now suffering more than if she had died. Not killing her may have been the ultimate revenge. She'd never have a peaceful night's sleep again. Love is like a double-edged sword. It can bring you happiness, but it can also cause unbearable pain. These guys were bored, so they wandered the forest with flashlights in the middle of the night. They safely made it to the cabin, but Xavier still felt uneasy and went outside with his flashlight to check. The next second, he was grabbed, but he didn't seem too nervous. It was his father. His father was a businessman, determined to groom Xavier to star in movies. But in movies with no moral boundaries, Xavier had pursued his dream of becoming a star. But when he saw the lack of morals, he immediately lost interest. Can you imagine how bad it was? His co-stars were all men with six-packs. His father tried to convince Xavier, but Xavier only grew angrier. He wanted to get out of the car and never see this rusted-over man again, but his father threw him to the ground, using threats to try to convince him. In the end, Xavier, desperate to save himself, blurted out about his friend's six-pack abs. At that moment, they were showering, so Xavier led his father to secretly watch. What he saw shocked him. His father had never seen anything like it. The more he looked, the more amazed and captivated he became. Xavier slipped away unnoticed. Suddenly, a knife stabbed into his father's head, killing him. When the others finished their showers and came out, they were horrified to find someone spying on them and dead. Ray, mustering his courage, reached up to check if the father was still breathing. Seeing him lying there, everyone was terrified. Xavier came back, even more nervous, shouting for help for the man but not daring to admit he knew him. After all, the man's actions were those of a peeping Tom. They all had a sneaking suspicion that Benjamin might be back. This looked like his work. They all ran to the car, and once it started, they suddenly felt safe. If they could leave, they would indeed be safe, because this was Camp Redwood. But after driving less than 200 meters, they nearly hit a nurse who had run out. Though they didn't hit her, they crashed trying to avoid her, wrecking the car. Do you think childhood experiences have a big impact on your life? This guy was full of murderous intent. If he wasn't breaking into houses, he was committing arson. His behavior was closely tied to his childhood. His mother worked in a shoe factory, and the first breath he ever took was filled with chemicals. He wanted to play ball, but others treated him like the ball, hitting his head with a swing. He believed that man had done it on purpose. After that blow, he developed epilepsy, but the man just kept bullying his mother. Then his cousin came home and saved him. His cousin was a soldier who had seen the world, and he taught him that on the battlefield. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want. His wife didn't think it was a good idea to teach a child that, so his cousin shot her. Growing up in this environment, his personality was bound to be twisted. But today, when he saw Margaret, he felt the urge to open up to her. Of course, finding the right outlet for his emotions might mean he wouldn't turn out so extreme. He had followed Brooke to this place but ended up falling for Margaret. Whether she could warm his heart or his bed would depend on his luck. Margaret lived at Camp Redwood. Everyone feared the name, but she insisted on running the place. She spotted a woman in the forest, the same woman who had witnessed Benjamin's massacre at Redwood years ago. And somehow, she was still alive. It was strange. Really, she had died several times but never seemed to stay dead. Even she couldn't understand it. She often stared at her hands, wondering if she was a person or a ghost. Margaret didn't believe in that stuff. If she could see you, you were alive. And that was that. Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if Margaret is a person or a ghost. A group of young people, with more courage than sense, came here to camp and relax, but when things didn't feel right, they planned to leave. The keys, however, were in the cabin, and they had to muster the courage to go back and get them, but then there was a noise outside. Originally, they just wanted a trip to the countryside to relax. They hadn't expected to end up trapped inside the cabin. Just as they were about to break down the door, everything outside suddenly went quiet. No more knocking, no more noise. This only made it scarier. A bearded man crept to the door and crouched down to peek outside. It turned out to be a group of kids playing a prank. They were dressed up as Benjamin to scare tourists and wished them a happy holiday. They used the legendary killer as a character for their prank. At that moment, the real Benjamin appeared, and the kids thought he was just another actor, laughing and mocking him for being late. Little did they know, he was the real deal. He stabbed them with a white blade and pulled out a red one. The real killing monster had shown up, and within seconds, a few people were already down. He continued collecting ears, as usual, and everyone ran into the forest, trying to save their lives, but traps and pitfalls were everywhere, and Ray and his friend fell victim to one. Brooke finally managed to escape and even ran into the nurse. Brooke was nervous, wondering why she was the only one to make it out when no one else did. While worried, Brooke suddenly thought the best thing to do was to call the police, so she suggested this to the nurse. The nurse agreed, thinking it was a good idea, and handed her the car keys. But just as Brooke got to the car, the nurse knocked her out with a tranquilizer. Why did the nurse do that? Do you know why educated people are the most dangerous? It turns out the nurse wasn't really a nurse, she was the nurse. Her latest research topic was serial killers, and she believed no one becomes a killer without a reason. She thought there had to be a reason Benjamin became a killer. When she went to see Benjamin, he was still locked up in the asylum, where he had been for 14 years without speaking a word. Benjamin himself found it strange because he had no memory of killing anyone. The nurse visited him and used her knowledge of past cases and current psychology to successfully get Benjamin to speak. The nurse was straightforward and told him she wanted to study what made him kill. She didn't believe anyone was born evil, and Benjamin suddenly seemed to find hope. He didn't understand why everyone thought he was a killer. He had no recollection of doing anything terrible. It was just that everyone said he was so terrifying that he began to doubt himself, which shows that sometimes words are scarier than knives. The nurse believed that if she could discover the reason, it could help end the bloodshed once and for all. Benjamin seemed to think he could help uncover the truth, making it a meaningful endeavor. So, he followed the nurse's plan to break out. With his strength and her strategy, they successfully escaped, and the nurse's research destination, of course, was Camp Redwood. On the way, they met a young girl who was headed to Camp Redwood to become a nurse. The nurse tied her up and took her place, impersonating her to enter the camp. Brooke had been knocked out with a tranquilizer and couldn't figure out why the nurse wanted her unconscious. The reason was that she wasn't a real nurse, and she needed to gather material for her research. At the party, whenever music started playing, Ray would always appear confident, as if it were his own private performance. Not only did they compete in drinking games, but they also made money. However, Ray's good friend couldn't handle it and left. Disappointed, Ray watched him leave in frustration, but just as he turned, his friend fell down the stairs. Ray panicked and rushed down, only to find his friend had died. It was clearly an accident, but if others didn't see it that way, Ray would never clear his name, so he decided to make the accident more accidental. He brought his friend to the top of a hill, put him in the driver's seat, and pushed the car off the cliff once it fell. It would be a true accident, but as the car started to roll, his friend suddenly woke up. He was still alive, and Ray tried to stop the car but couldn't, and he couldn't pull his friend out either. He watched the car roll off the cliff, and now he had truly killed someone. To avoid being hunted down, Ray joined the group for a trip to the countryside, which led him to this cursed place, Camp Redwood. He saw Gus impaled and couldn't figure out how to save him. Rather than waiting around, Ray decided it was better to just leave. Ray had never known what loyalty was, and he ran away. The forest was terrifying. He ran until he was out of breath and had no choice but to stop and catch it. Suddenly, a hand grabbed him. It was Xavier, and they had finally found the others. Ray lied and said the big guy had gotten lost. The four of them discussed it and decided to split up. Xavier and the coach went to save the others, while Ray and Montana were to ride a motorcycle and find the police. But just as they found the motorcycle, Richard slowly walked out, like a wandering spirit. Montana turned to see Ray already on the motorcycle, riding off without her. He still didn't know what loyalty was, but people like him don't live long. Before he could even leave Camp Redwood, Benjamin killed him. Richard slowly advanced on Montana. She backed up until she couldn't anymore, watching him draw a knife. Suddenly, Montana pushed Richard away, and then grabbed him and kissed him. It was a confusing scene, but it turns out they already knew each other. And Richard listened to Montana. Their story started a year ago. Montana was a fitness instructor, and she loved to teach aerobics to rock music. What was even more amazing was that all her students were men, no women at all. Living among men, she had been secretly plotting something big. Unfortunately, none of her students were the right fit until Richard showed up. Richard was immediately captivated by Montana's curvy figure and fiery personality. Montana greeted Richard, thinking he was a new student. At that moment, another student got upset with Montana, and the two exchanged words. Montana's go-to phrase was to tell him to drop dead, and after class, the guy actually died in the bathroom. This was Richard's gift for his goddess upon their first meeting. Any normal person would be terrified by such a scene, but Montana slapped him, then pulled him close again, right next to the corpse. They did something nobody would want to witness. Afterward, Montana asked Richard if he would ever kill her. Of course, Richard said he wouldn't. Then Montana asked if he would kill for her, and Richard, without hesitation, agreed. She wanted Richard to kill Brooke. Brooke's fiancé went on a killing spree at their wedding. The reason was that, the night before the wedding, his best friend had spent the night at Brooke's house. He felt utterly betrayed. He killed his friend, then shot himself. That best friend was Montana's brother. She believed Brooke had slept with her brother and caused his death. While Brooke continued living freely, she demanded that Richard kill her. Xavier originally just wanted to go on a relaxing trip to the countryside, but strange events made his legs tremble. Two killers had appeared at this campsite, and they were people often seen in newspapers and magazines. While Xavier was lucky in his escape, Gus was not so fortunate. Xavier worked hard to rescue Gus and found a cabin for him to rest in, but Gus wasn't moving. The coach casually picked up a syringe, ready to inject it, and Xavier asked if he knew what he was doing. The coach admitted he didn't, but figured he had nothing to lose. And somehow, Gus came to. It wasn't because the syringe was miraculous, he had just fainted at the sight of blood. Suddenly, Xavier had a stroke of genius and remembered that his father had driven them here. If they had a car, they could leave. They split up, with the coach going to find the car, and Xavier searching for the others so they could all leave together. Xavier darted around and reached the kitchen, where the cook was still calmly making sandwiches. Clearly, she had no idea what was going on. Then Benjamin suddenly appeared. Xavier immediately hid under the table and realized the cook and Benjamin knew each other. The cook stayed calm, chatting with Benjamin and making him a sandwich, even reminiscing about his favorite food from the past. No matter what stage of life a person is in, when they reconnect with old memories, they become less cold-hearted. Xavier accidentally made a noise, and Benjamin easily overpowered him. The cook tried to help, but Benjamin killed her with one hand. When Xavier woke up after passing out, he found himself locked inside the oven, being cooked. Just as he was about to be roasted alive, the cook used her last breath to open the oven for him. She couldn't move anymore and asked Xavier to put her out of her misery. Xavier didn't want to, but he had no choice. He ended her life. This woman was remarkable. Looking at a little teddy bear, she recalled the first day she met Benjamin, the day she became his wife. Every couple has their own romantic story, and Benjamin had made a teddy bear for her with his own hands, but some nosy passerby mocked them, saying that with their looks, they didn't deserve a love story, calling them freaks. The verbal humiliation enraged the woman, and she vowed to make all those who looked down on them pay. But what could a frail woman like her do? She slaughtered everyone in the camp. It wasn't Benjamin who killed them, it was Margaret, and she framed Benjamin for the crime. Benjamin was arrested, sent to a mental hospital, and subjected to electroshock therapy. He even forgot whether or not he had actually killed anyone. Benjamin had been a soldier, and every time he killed, he had a habit of cutting off ears as trophies. Margaret had also cut off the ears of the camp's victims, including her own. She felt that words of ridicule were more painful than losing an ear. This is why many people enjoy using hurtful words to provoke others. Those words can be fatal. By this time, Benjamin had returned to Camp Redwood, but another killer had shown up too, and they finally crossed paths. The two infamous killers met, but the more awkward situation was that Brooke was caught in a trap. Hanging in midair, the two killers fought, exchanging blows with knives. Brooke seized the opportunity to escape, but Richard wasn't much of a fighter. He couldn't even handle Brooke, let alone Benjamin. Benjamin hung him from a tree, turning him into a specimen. But the truly terrifying part was that Richard could come back to life, and his wounds would slowly heal. Benjamin found Margaret, furious that he could have lived a normal life, but she had ruined him, turning him into a monster feared by everyone. Filled with rage, he pulled out his knife, but Margaret shot him 3 times. Their former love now turned to violence. What a tragic sight. The coach barged in and was stunned by what he saw. Margaret had just killed the big bad guy. As he was about to praise Margaret, she stabbed him in the heart. Even in his dying moments, the coach couldn't understand why she did it. Margaret, following her usual habit, cut off the coach's ear, only to realize that Benjamin was no longer there. By the time Benjamin recovered his strength, he was back on his feet. When he found Margaret again, he grabbed her by the throat, ready to kill her. Suddenly, an arrow struck him. It was Xavier. Without hesitation, Xavier shot Benjamin 5 more times. Xavier hated him with a passion. Benjamin had ruined his handsome face by locking him in the oven and disfiguring him. He went to check if Margaret was hurt, but as soon as she regained consciousness, she pulled out a knife and disemboweled Xavier. Xavier thought he had survived, but instead, he was caught off guard and killed in a ridiculous twist of fate. The nurse discovered something was very wrong with her father. She secretly followed him and found out he had another woman on the side. She was furious on her mother's behalf. She quietly followed him into the house and walked to the room, but the door was locked. She knocked, but there was no response. When her anger took over and she forced the door open, the woman inside had already been disemboweled. It turned out her father didn't love women, he loved killing them. Suddenly, the woman moved. The nurse tried to wrap her in a blanket, but before she could, her father walked in. Her father explained that he was addicted to killing and simply couldn't stop. He said everyone has a dark side, but most people are lucky enough that it never gets activated. Her father told her that the feeling was truly incredible and invited her to join Satan's family. She couldn't accept that her father had become one of Satan's followers. Before she could grieve, both Richard and her father had vanished. Do you know what despair feels like? They were down to their last car. If they could start it, they could leave this cursed place. But Margaret secretly set the car on fire. They returned to the cabin, disheartened. But Margaret told them there seemed to be another car across the lake. Gus gathered his courage and followed Margaret to check it out. They took a small boat out to the middle of the lake, and Margaret started talking nonsense about God, death, and darkness, things Gus couldn't make sense of. Seeing his confusion, Margaret grabbed an oar and began beating him. Had Gus not already been injured, he wouldn't have been so easily defeated by this woman. Margaret cut off Gus's ear, then kicked him into the lake, pushing him down with her foot. In truth, they had no real grudge. Margaret just didn't like him, that's all. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, only Brooke and Montana remained. Montana grabbed a weapon, planning to avenge her brother. She advanced on Brooke, but Brooke suddenly let out a shocked scream. It wasn't because of Montana, but because Ray was floating outside. Brooke rushed out to find Ray, and when they met, they hugged tightly. Ray was nearly in tears. They quietly sneaked into the cafeteria, which was empty, and started talking. Brooke found him so sweet that she kissed him, and soon after, things escalated. To be honest, Ray was satisfied, and Brooke seemed content too. Seeing him so exhausted, Brooke went to the fridge to find him something to eat, to help him regain his strength. After all, a long night requires several rounds before dawn, but as soon as Brooke opened the fridge, she screamed. Ray rushed over, planning to play the hero, but when he saw a severed head inside, he nearly fainted. The head was his own. Ray couldn't make sense of it and leaned on Brooke's shoulder for support. But Brooke, her soul nearly leaving her body, told him not to touch her and ran off. One moment they were intimate, the next they were like strangers. Brooke ran back to the cabin, eager to tell Montana everything, but sometimes people are scarier than ghosts. While Brooke wasn't paying attention, Montana knocked her to the ground. When Brooke came to, Montana thought she had one. Worried that Brooke wouldn't understand why she was dying, she explained that it was all for her brother. Montana revealed that Richard had appeared at Brooke's house because of her. Afraid Brooke wouldn't get it, Montana laid it all out. But while she was deep in explanation, Brooke grabbed a metal rod from the ground and stabbed her. Then Brooke ran again. She fled to another cabin and hid in a corner, not knowing where her friends had gone. As if the terrifying forest wasn't bad enough, she was now completely alone. But Montana found her, and the two beautiful women fought fiercely. Women can fight until dawn when they're angry. After a long, relentless battle, Montana began to gain the upper hand. She raised her knife and taunted Brooke, telling her she was done for. But with one quick move, Brooke flipped Montana over and stabbed her with her small knife. At that moment, a school bus pulled up on the road, and many people watched as Brooke killed Montana. Everyone saw Brooke with blood on her hands, but no one realized it was self-defense. When the police arrested her, Margaret watched with a slight smile, stabbed her own leg, and then stumbled out, screaming for help. She claimed that Brooke had killed everyone at the camp, portraying Brooke as a beautiful but deranged killer. In reality, only Margaret and Brooke had survived. With Brooke in prison, Margaret would be the ultimate victor. Ray walked out leisurely at this point, and when the police saw him covered in wounds, they immediately checked his pulse. To their surprise, his pulse was 0, and they rushed him to the ambulance. But would Ray make it to the city alive? The car drove off, but Ray couldn't leave Camp Redwood. He didn't realize he was a ghost. Strange things started happening, like the police car moving on its own. Montana slowly walked up to the police officer, looking all pitiful, and then suddenly grabbed his gun and killed him. Since she couldn't die, she figured she might as well go on a killing spree. But why did the police car drive off by itself? It was because Richard and Benjamin were inside. After Benjamin was shot and killed by Xavier, Richard made a deal with Benjamin. If he would submit to Satan and serve as Richard's follower, he could be resurrected forever. Benjamin, with no other choice, agreed. But it didn't take long for him to regret it. Believing in Satan required constant killing, and for someone with a conscience, living like that was unbearable. Benjamin saw a newspaper that had Richard's wanted poster on it. He bought it for $1 and gave it to a passerby. Soon, every passerby tried to catch the notorious killer, and anyone nearby chased after him. Richard ran, spotting a car with a woman inside. He tried to steal the car, but he couldn't even beat a woman. He was beaten by the crowd. Benjamin drove the car and enjoyed watching it all. While Richard was sent to prison, a young guy with a camera loved to take photos, and he came to Camp Redwood, growing more and more excited as he captured the beautiful scenery. But it wasn't just the landscape that was beautiful, the women were too. What excited him even more was how bold and wild they were. Montana struck up a lively conversation with him, even offering to take off her clothes for his photos. Any man would know what that meant. The guy was honest. He said he'd love to, though he had come here with his girlfriend. He quickly forgot about his girlfriend. Montana killed him, and Xavier came out to praise her for doing a great job. Since they couldn't leave, they figured they might as well kill for fun. It turns out they had become the demons of Camp Redwood. All of this was orchestrated by Margaret, who had now become a famous businesswoman. Meanwhile, Brooke ended up in prison because of Margaret, and she had a chance encounter with Richard. Richard tried to convince Brooke to worship Satan, but Brooke would rather die than believe in such things. But every night in her cell, she heard a voice calling to her. It turned out Richard was speaking. He was in the cell next door. Brooke, with her kind heart and pure soul, would never be tainted by evil, but unfortunately, she was about to be sent to the guillotine. As she was being taken away, Richard kept calling out to her, telling her that if she believed in Satan, she wouldn't have to die. Brooke responded with a hand gesture. Brooke was brought into a room for her execution, still proclaiming her innocence, but no one cared. They strapped her to the table and injected her with something to make her sleep forever. Perhaps it was the most peaceful way to die. Margaret, now a wealthy woman, had come specifically to watch the execution. She was furious, thinking Brooke deserved to be beheaded instead. This was once a notorious killer who struck fear into everyone. He had escaped Richard's control, leading to Richard's imprisonment. He found a woman to live with. The woman didn't mind that he had once been a murderer, and he didn't mind that she used to be a prostitute. They had a child and seemed happy. This was the kind of life Benjamin was satisfied with. He worked at a video rental store and even had a chance to become the assistant manager, watching himself make small progress every day. He not only liked himself but had grown to love the world. But some things still suffocated him. The TV kept showing Margaret talking about reopening Camp Redwood. Benjamin's wife wanted to change the channel, but Benjamin told her to relax. Avoiding the past wouldn't bring true peace, facing it would. Benjamin had already let go of the past. He saw everything from back then as nothing more than a dream. Living in the present was all that mattered to him now. Benjamin went to work and came home, rain or shine, just like always. But today, he was dragged back into his old nightmare. When he returned home, the eerie silence was unnerving. He rushed inside to find his wife murdered in their bed. Luckily, their child was unharmed, but it became his weak spot, a way to force him back to Satan. Benjamin sent his child to live with his sister-in-law and decided to settle everything himself. He knew he had to take the risk alone to protect his child. He put on his raincoat again, grabbed his keys, and prepared to return to his killer persona. But that killer instinct had dulled. He had the strength, but nothing more. When he arrived at Camp Redwood, he was immediately captured by a group of young people. In the end, they spared him, showing mercy instead of killing him outright. Camp Redwood had become Montana and Xavier's territory. They began grilling Benjamin with soul-crushing questions, trying to understand what had happened. Benjamin could have stayed silent, but when he revealed the truth, Even these ghostly figures were shaken. His story made even the dead tremble. Do you understand the extent of a mother's love for her children? Lavinia had 2 kids. She took a job at the camp just so she could take care of them. Lavinia didn't really like the camp or the job, but for her children and for survival, she endured. Of the 2, she adored her younger child but completely ignored the older one. The older boy liked to read adult comics, the kind that never got published. Lavinia was worried about his precocious behavior and urged him to go outside and make some friends. Instead of always sitting in the corner staring at dirty magazines, Lavinia told them to go out and make some friends, reminding her older son to keep an eye on his younger brother. There were plenty of pretty girls outside, and the older brother finally mustered the courage to approach one. Unfortunately, he was met with the girls' ridicule. They mocked him for being chubby. In truth, the older brother loved interacting with girls, knowing that real life was far better than what he saw in books. At that moment, a couple, lost in affection, was about to leave, but at this crucial moment, the younger brother stepped forward, saying he wanted to go swimming. The older brother stopped him, telling him to sit quietly and not move. Then, he quietly followed the couple to watch them. This live show was indeed far better than anything in the books, and it was unclear whether the older brother was curious or trying to learn something, but he was totally engrossed. Meanwhile, the younger brother wasn't entirely without initiative. He took off his clothes and jumped into the water. When the older brother heard the splash, he ran back, panicking when he saw his brother was gone. He finally relaxed when his brother's head resurfaced from the water, but then the nearby boat started moving, and the older brother realized what was happening, but it was too late. The younger brother was caught under the boat and killed. Lavinia rushed over in a panic, seeing that her beloved child was gone. The grief was suffocating, and it quickly turned into hatred. She blamed everyone present, including her older son, and wanted them all to pay the price. That night, the older brother was jolted awake by a nightmare. He realized his mother wasn't in bed and anxiously went to look for her. After all, waking from a nightmare is never a good sign. The older brother entered another cabin, and when he walked in, everyone inside was already dead. He was too terrified to even react. He was still just a child. At that moment, Lavinia entered, holding a small knife. It was clear the carnage was her doing. She extended her arms, inviting her son into her embrace. The older brother was completely in shock. Seeing him unmoving, Lavinia thought he was being disobedient. She believed her older son bore some responsibility for the younger one's death, so she lunged at him, stabbing his leg with the knife. The older brother scrambled to escape, crawling toward the door, and Lavinia followed him outside. In her haste, she tripped and dropped the knife right in front of her son. The older brother picked it up, turned around, and stabbed Lavinia. He pulled the knife out, and Lavinia collapsed. Weak and confused, she stared at her son with a mind full of questions, unable to understand why he had killed his own brother. She couldn't believe it was an accident. She was convinced it was deliberate. That older brother was Benjamin, and his memories were filled with darkness. Though he longed to walk toward the light, but stabbing his own mother had plunged him into a lifetime of darkness. All of this had happened at Camp Redwood, and he knew Lavinia's spirit was still full of vengeance, ready for revenge. He walked into the cabin, and to his surprise, he actually saw Lavinia again. She once more extended her arms, inviting him into her embrace. But Benjamin was no longer the child he once was. He had been through too much, and he remained calm. But when Lavinia revealed the truth to him, his calmness began to unravel. It turned out Lavinia had been behind everything. She believed her life had been a mess, and she wanted Benjamin to experience that same misery. Seeing her son get married and bask in the warmth of love made her even more bitter. She could tell that her daughter-in-law wasn't much better off, so she whispered a few words into her daughter-in-law's ear, and the darkness inside her emerged. In one night, she killed all the campers, pinning the crime on Benjamin. From that point on, Benjamin became infamous as a crazed killer. Everyone who saw him was terrified, but Benjamin had always thought this was all the work of his beloved wife. He never imagined that the root of all this evil was his own mother. Benjamin was filled with confusion, anger, panic, shock, and helplessness. After telling him everything, Lavinia, satisfied by Benjamin's distress, peacefully left. Feeling utterly lost, Benjamin went to the lake where his younger brother had died. Sharpening his knife, Lavinia appeared again, scolding Benjamin, telling him he had no right to be there. This was the place where she remembered her younger son, and Benjamin didn't deserve to sit there. Feeling deeply hurt, Benjamin snapped back at Lavinia. For the first time in his life, Benjamin dared to confront his mother directly. Unexpectedly, Lavinia forgave him after hearing his words. She told him to leave the camp and go find his own son, but Benjamin never saw his mother as an opponent. He knew the misunderstandings would eventually be cleared up. His real enemy was Richard. Richard had magical powers that allowed him to be resurrected infinitely. Benjamin knew he couldn't beat Richard, but for the sake of his son's safety, he had no choice but to fight. Lavinia calmly told him that if Richard killed him, he wouldn't be able to come back to life. But if Benjamin killed himself, the strange magic of Camp Redwood would allow him to be resurrected. So his mother suggested that he take matters into his own hands. Benjamin took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. He truly loved this world. But for his son, he took his own life. She was supposed to be a death row inmate, and everyone thought that one injection would put her into eternal sleep. But no one expected that the Rita would save Brooke. It turns out that reading a lot really does pay off. The Rita took Brooke to a private residence, but even after surviving such a close brush with death, Brooke hadn't fully recovered from her fears. She spent her days haunted by nightmares, waking up in terror in the middle of the night. After a few days of struggle, Brooke finally began to recover. The Rita continued to bring her delicious burgers. Then suddenly, Brooke turned the tables and restrained the Rita, demanding to know why she had saved her. The Rita revealed the truth about Camp Redwood, and Brooke finally understood what had really been going on, almost dying without knowing the full story. Brooke had spent several years in prison, losing nearly all of her youth. She decided to return to Camp Redwood to seek revenge for her lost youth, to contribute to the truth, and to pay the price for justice. She and the Rita planned to have one last day of fun before setting off. They played carefree at the roller rink, thinking how wonderful it would be if there were no evil in the world, and they could play without worry every day. It was then that an older man approached them, saying he overheard their conversation and knew they were heading to Camp Redwood, asking if he could hitch a ride with them. The Rita politely declined, saying it wasn't a good idea to travel with strangers, which was the right call, but whether it was coincidence or planned, their car broke down soon after. At that moment, the older man appeared again, offering to fix their car. Surprisingly, he really did fix it. Strangely, after fixing the car, he didn't ask for the ride he had wanted earlier. At this point, Brooke and the Rita both instinctively invited him to join them in the car. The Rita was probably thinking that if the car broke down again, having a mechanic with them would give her peace of mind. So the three of them hit the road together. At first, it was fun and carefree, with the two girls goofing around, laughing and playing. But now, with the older man in the car, things changed. If he had just stayed quiet, it might have been fine. But instead, he wouldn't stop talking. He was only hitching a ride, but he kept telling them terrifying stories along the way. The Rita pulled over and politely asked him to get out of the car, saying they didn't want to continue the trip with him, but the man made no move to leave. Instead, he acted as though he owned the car. He said it was too hot outside, and getting out now would definitely give him heat stroke. Brooke pulled out a knife, ready to defend herself, but before anything could happen, a police officer arrived. It was both fortunate and unfortunate, as Brooke was an escaped death row inmate, and she quickly put the knife away. The officer approached the car and warned the Rita that many women had gone missing on this highway, advising them to be careful. Before he could finish his sentence, the officer was shot by the older man. The man got out of the car, and Brooke immediately shouted at the Rita to drive. The man watched angrily as his two prey escaped. In his rage, he shot and killed the officer. Brooke and the Rita continued driving, but they were still far from Camp Redwood. As they waited at a stoplight, suddenly, the car behind them rammed into theirs. The driver of the truck in front yelled at them in frustration, only to be shot and killed by the older man. Once again, the two women found themselves back in the clutches of the man. When Brooke regained consciousness, the older man had been staring at her for a long time. Her first thought was about the Rita. The man had tied her to the back of the car. If the car moved, the Rita would be dragged to her death. The man gave Brooke two options: either hit the gas and drag the Rita, or be shot dead by him. In a sudden fit of rage, Brooke chose to drive. The man held a gun on her, demanding she hit the gas immediately. He enjoyed watching people suffer, but instead of moving forward, Brooke floored it in reverse, while the Rita cleverly laid down. After a sharp reverse and a quick brake, Brooke demonstrated her impressive skills. They managed to tie the man to a telephone pole. As punishment, Brooke cut off his thumb, and with a carefree attitude, she grabbed her backpack and prepared to head to Camp Redwood on foot. She didn't want the Rita to come along, as Brooke was ready for a one-way trip with no return. They shared a mutual understanding as they walked together. They stopped at a diner, ordered a latte, and talked while sipping coffee. Suddenly, Stacy walked over and sat down uninvited. It turned out Stacy was a reporter, and Brooke, being an escaped inmate, immediately grabbed the Rita and left, but Stacy tracked them down to their hotel, claiming she knew everything about them. It turned out Stacy, like the Rita, had become obsessed with research. She wanted to join them at Camp Redwood, and Brooke had no choice but to let her tag along. After all, as a death row escapee, if she didn't comply, Stacy could easily turn her in, so they headed to Camp Redwood together. Finding a kindred spirit is rare, but it was clear Stacy wasn't one. She said there were many versions of the truth, and the one she planned to report would be the most sensationalized version. For her, the truth didn't matter. What mattered was getting clicks and making money. Brooke couldn't stand her, realizing they were not on the same path at all. It's hard to talk to someone with completely different values, and Brooke was no longer the person she once was. Now, she was bold and fearless, and if someone rubbed her the wrong way, she wasn't afraid to take action. She took Stacy to a cabin and described how she had been tied up there, even offering to recreate the scene. When Brooke pulled out a knife, the Rita quickly grabbed her and dragged her outside. Brooke had intended to turn the reenactment into reality and kill Stacy, but the Rita stopped her from giving in to the darkness. She reminded Brooke that the line between good and evil is thin. One moment of carelessness and the evil side can take over. Just like when you're angry, that state of mind may not reflect the real you, because anger can make you do things you'd never expect. But the world will always have bad people, just as it will never be short of good ones. A woman came by and rescued the older man. It was already the middle of the night, and she planned to take him to the hospital to see if he could be saved. But the man threw the woman into the trunk of the car. That was how he repaid his rescuer. He drove the car to another location, and by the time they arrived, it was morning. The man yelled at the woman, who was now terrified beyond belief. She begged him to let her go, promising she'd do anything if he spared her life. But the man swiftly and brutally stabbed her, killing her instantly. He continued driving and came across a young man walking along the road. The young man was trying to leave Camp Redwood. The man offered him a ride, and they continued on their way. But the man, being who he was, ended up hitting someone with his car, none other than the infamous Benjamin. Benjamin had been in the middle of a fight with Richard when the car hit him, causing Benjamin to flee. Richard was furious, blaming the man's poor driving for Benjamin's escape. The man, being a chatterbox, wouldn't stop talking, claiming that he and Richard were the same. He, too, enjoyed killing people, and even proudly showed Richard the trophies in his trunk. He offered to become Richard's follower, happy to be his lackey as long as it meant he could keep killing. Richard, pleased with the offer, was surprised at how easily he had gained a subordinate, and told the man to follow him as they ventured deeper into Camp Redwood. But the man couldn't stop talking, boasting about how great he was. Richard, uninterested in his chatter, focused on digging up Benjamin's body. But then Benjamin arrived, and once again, Richard drew his knife and began fighting with Benjamin. Suddenly, Benjamin was shot in the head. It was Margaret who pulled the trigger. Margaret had arrived, as she was the one organizing the music festival at Camp Redwood. Despite the frequent deaths at Camp Redwood, she had still invited various celebrities to attend. One of her assistants, while bringing snacks to the car, discovered the place littered with bodies. All Richard's doing. Panicked, the assistant ran to Margaret, but Margaret remained calm, assuring her that the music festival would continue as planned. The assistant, overwhelmed, wanted to quit on the spot and go home, but Margaret wouldn't allow it and ordered her to wrap the bodies and send them off in another vehicle. The assistant was stunned to find that a band was still rehearsing nearby, completely unaware of what was happening. They were so absorbed in their music. It was a famous band, and even the assistant was a fan. The band went to the stage to do a sound check. Meanwhile, Richard had been watching them for a while. One of the band members asked Richard who he was working for. Richard, without hesitation, replied, "Satan." The band member immediately pulled out a satanic pendant, revealing that he, too, was a fan of Satan. Richard, thrilled, became an instant fan of the band, rocking out as he walked. Suddenly, Benjamin appeared again, and he and Richard began to fight once more. Margaret arrived and shot Benjamin dead, but in Camp Redwood, souls can be resurrected infinitely. Xavier and his group helped the revived Benjamin, throwing him into a boat to let him drift away. Suddenly, something pulled Benjamin underwater, and a strange moment occurred. Benjamin saw not only his younger brother but also his mother. It was as if time had reversed, and they were camping together again, just like in the old days. Pure, innocent, and beautiful. Benjamin, moved to tears, realized that despite everything, the best moments of his life were from his childhood. Meanwhile, Bobby, Benjamin's son, made a bold decision. He decided to venture into Camp Redwood on his own. He had grown up hearing stories about his father being a legend, though he had never met him, but he knew his father was at Camp Redwood. When he arrived at the edge of the camp, the driver refused to go any further. For 30 years, no one who entered the camp had ever come out. The driver even tried to convince Bobby not to go in, but Bobby was determined and walked in, his nerves tightening with each step. Seeing the stage for the music festival gave him chills, but Bobby wasn't afraid. He was Benjamin's son. After all, back when Benjamin had stabbed himself, it was to hold off Richard and ensure his son could grow up safely. Now, in the blink of an eye, Bobby had grown into a man. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the stage, but suddenly Montana appeared behind him, curiously asking what that thing in his hand was. Since 30 years ago, there had been no such thing as a smartphone. Montana took the phone and tapped on it a few times. She marveled at how amazing it was, and Bobby thought Montana looked familiar, like a famous fitness instructor from back in the day. Montana pointed to the picture and said, "That's me." Bobby was even more confused. If Montana were alive, she'd be over 50 by now, and surely wouldn't look as young and fit. Montana was at a loss for words, unsure how to explain. Just then, the male coach appeared. Bobby recognized him. Too, he was another celebrity from 30 years ago. But how were they both still so young? Since they couldn't explain, they decided to show him. Montana told Bobby to shoot her, but being a kind person, he refused. So Montana shot herself, and the coach stabbed himself. Bobby was horrified. What was wrong with these people? He turned to run, but when he reached the door, both Montana and the coach had already revived and walked in again. That's when Bobby realized they were ghosts. Montana, still curious, asked Bobby if people still did aerobics nowadays. She mentioned that it had been all the rage when she was alive. Bobby told her only a few people still did it now. Curious, Bobby asked Montana about his father. Montana regretted ever provoking Richard's bloodlust. She had dragged Richard by the hand, making him think he was entering a place of pleasure, but he hadn't realized the room was full of people waiting for him. Before Richard could react, Montana had already stabbed him. Richard cursed at Montana in rage, but the group, armed with small knives, began stabbing him together. Richard laughed, saying it was pointless. Satan had his back, and he'd be back soon enough. He was smart, but they weren't dumb either. They came up with a brilliant plan to take shifts, watching him around the clock. As soon as he revived, they would kill him again. Sure enough, Richard woke up, and Ray picked up a hammer, smashing his shin. Richard, seething with anger, swore vengeance on Ray, promising to make him pay in blood. But before he could finish, Gus stepped in and stabbed him again, killing him. But it didn't matter. Richard would soon revive again. Today, it was the two girls' turn to kill him. Everyone had their shifts planned out. As soon as Richard revived, they'd take him down again. They had been doing this for 30 years, and the reason they were so determined to keep killing Richard was to stop him from going after Benjamin's son. Benjamin's son had finally grown up and come to Camp Redwood. But that day, something went wrong. Gus and the woman on duty got bored and started chatting, and things got a bit too personal, leading them to do something more intimate. During that time, Richard quietly revived and killed both of them. But Richard's real target wasn't the ghosts, it was Bobby. Because he was a special being, Bobby had almost made it to the entrance of Camp Redwood when Richard caught up to him. He was about to strike, but fortunately, the others arrived just in time. Once again, Richard fell,